I arrived at my daughter's wedding in Seattle wearing my best suit, cane in hand, ready to see her on the happiest day of her life. But when I reached the entrance, she looked at me, smiled coldly, and said, "Your name isn't on the list, Dad. Maybe you should just go." In that moment, every sacrifice I had made, every night I worked late, every dollar I saved for her future, felt like it vanished into thin air. She thought I was finished, erased from her story. But what she didn't know was that I had prepared long ago. I had hidden documents and proof they never imagined I kept safe. As she turned her back on me, I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a reckoning they would never forget. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my voice reaches. The heat of the summer afternoon clung to the air as the taxi dropped me at the curb outside the wedding hall. The building gleamed with glass and marble, tall columns catching the light as if they belonged to another world. Adjusting the jacket that felt tighter than it used to, I shifted my weight off my aching knees and steadied myself before the grand entrance. A deep breath filled my chest, but it carried no ease. The doormen moved briskly, polished shoes tapping against the stone steps. Couples streamed past me in elegant clothes, laughter rolling off their tongues as though this day was a promise of joy. I had promised myself I wouldn't falter. A father should stand tall at his daughter's wedding, even if he came alone, even if the silence of an empty house echoed in his ears when he left it this morning. The glass doors parted, releasing a gust of cool air scented with lilies and polished wood. My eyes swept across the expanse of the lobby, chandeliers glittering like stars, banners trimmed in gold, voices rising in welcome. For a moment, I wished someone had called, confirmed, reminded me where to stand, what to do. The thought pressed in like a whisper. Why hadn't anyone called? Straightening my tie, I moved toward the check-in desk where a line of guests was forming. A young man in a crisp suit, his name tag reading Clive Darden, smiled politely as he flipped through the guest list. When my turn came, I leaned forward with the certainty of belonging. "Merle Ridgway," I said, my voice steady. "Father of the bride." Clive's eyes skimmed down the paper. He frowned, flipped back a page, then checked again. The pause stretched thin. "I'm sorry, sir," he murmured. "I don't see your name here." A hush gathered around us. Guests waiting behind leaned closer, curiosity sharpening the air. My throat tightened, but I held my ground. "That can't be right," I said, louder now. "I'm her father." Of course I'm on the list. Clive glanced at me with an awkward stiffness, his hand frozen on the clipboard. The silence cut deeper than words. Murmurs rippled through the line. The humiliation began its slow creep, burning across my face. And then she appeared. Darlene, my daughter, descended the staircase in her gown, the ivory fabric catching every shard of light. For a heartbeat, I saw the little girl who once clutched my shoulders, squealing with laughter as I carried her through the yard, but her eyes now held no warmth, only a cool detachment sharpened by the edges of her smile. "Your name isn't on the list, Dad," she said, her voice lilting with mockery. "Maybe you should just go." The words struck harder than any blow. Guests gasped softly, the whispers swelling. Standing beside her, Travis Elroy, her husband now, remained silent, his hand resting on her arm as though to steady her resolve. His silence spoke louder than any accusation. He agreed. A memory clawed at me. Darlene perched on my shoulders, her giggles echoing against the summer sky. How quickly laughter had turned to scorn. I stepped back, willing my legs not to betray me. The sting of eyes pressing into my back was unbearable. Across the lobby, Victor and Helena Laskin lingered near the bar, their heads bent together, whispering with lips curled in satisfaction. They had always doubted me, and now they seemed to relish this spectacle. Something shifted inside. The humiliation hardened, its edge carving into suspicion. My daughter's words, the smirk on her face, the approving nods of others, it was too precise, too public. As I stood there, erased from my own daughter's wedding, it became clear this wasn't an accident. It was a plan. Inside the hall, I saw another man step into the place that should have been mine. Randall Pruitt stood tall in his tailored suit, holding out his arm for Darlene, who glided toward him in white lace and polished perfection. For a second, the world blurred at the edges, the sound of chatter, the rustle of dresses, even the violin warming up. All of it faded behind the sight of another man preparing to take my place. Years of carrying her on my shoulders, walking her to school, staying up through nights of fever. Every bit of it shrank into nothing when Randall offered her that arm. A stepfather in all but name, standing where I had once dreamed of standing. A hollow opened in my chest, as if the air itself had been pulled from me. Guests shifted in their seats, some pretending not to notice me at the back, others glancing with poorly hidden curiosity. Their eyes said it all. That's the father, isn't it? The one who wasn't wanted here. My gaze fell on the front row. A perfect seat was reserved with a small white card resting neatly against the backrest. But it wasn't for me. No name, no place of honor, just an empty space left deliberately blank, as though my absence were part of the design. A cruel mockery. A silent sign to everyone that the father of the bride had no role today. Victor and Helena Laskin. Faces lined with wealth and the smug calm of people who always get their way. Leaned toward each other with subtle nods. Their eyes flicked from Randall to Darlene, then briefly toward me, dismissive, cold, satisfied. They had sponsored this replacement, endorsed it with their smiles. Each second on my feet felt heavier, as if the ground itself pressed back. A soft murmur rose among the guests. Pity tinged their eyes, but no one spoke a word in my defense. To them, I was already exiled. Across the aisle, Travis Elroy stood rooted, his hand clasped behind his back. My son-in-law in every legal sense. Yet in this moment, he was nothing but a wall of silence. No nod, no flicker of recognition, not even a whisper of support. He simply looked away, as though my presence dirtied the air. Memories pricked at me without warning. The bills I paid for Darlene's education, the late nights spent sanding the floors of the house she grew up in, the long hours at the factory while others slept, all the quiet sacrifices buried deep in the bones of my life. And now, here, erased by silence, dismissed as if none of it had ever mattered. This wasn't oversight. It was orchestration, a design carefully plotted so that when the pictures were taken, history itself would forget me. My hand brushed the edge of a polished pew, steadying the tremor running through my arm. The wood was smooth, almost slick, as if meant to remind me how easily one could slip away from the scene, but I refused to collapse under their gaze. Then I saw her, Elodie, my granddaughter, barely 12, standing near the aisle with her small hands wrapped around a bouquet meant for scattering petals. Her eyes searched for me, and, when they found mine, confusion darkened her expression. She knew something was wrong, though she didn't yet have the words for betrayal. For a heartbeat, the humiliation broke. In its place came a steel thread weaving through my resolve. Elodie's gaze told me one truth. If I vanished now, they would erase me not only from this day, but from her memory too, and I couldn't let that happen. As I held her eyes, the noise of the hall returned, the tuning instruments, the rustle of silk, the rising hush before vows. But inside, a promise formed, sharper than grief, harder than humiliation. And when my granddaughter's gaze met mine, I knew I couldn't let them write me out of her world so easily. The corridors outside the main hall carried the muffled sounds of music and laughter, yet each step I took seemed heavier than the last. The walls were lined with framed photographs of weddings past, strangers beaming in moments of joy. Their smiles mocked the storm rising in my chest. The rejection at the entrance had cut deep, but what gnawed at me now was a sharper edge, an unshakable sense that something more sinister was unfolding behind those closed doors. A hushed voice drifted down the corridor, drawing me closer. Helena Laskin stood near a service alcove, speaking into her phone in clipped, deliberate tones. I lingered in the shadow, careful not to let my shoes scuff the floor. "Everything will be secure once Randall signs on behalf of Darlene," she whispered, the words carrying a chill that settled in my bones. For a moment, I questioned my ears. Randall? Signing on behalf of my daughter? My chest tightened. Memories of balancing bills, skipping meals so she could have her prom dress, and the long nights working double shifts to keep her in school flickered through me. Now, another man's pen was ready to erase me from her future. I leaned against the wall, letting her words sink in. Betrayal had its own kind of echo. It reverberated deeper than anger, turning every remembered sacrifice into a weight pressing down. The thought hit hard. I wasn't just being cut out of the wedding. I was being cut out of everything. Further down the hall, a narrow service door stood ajar. I edged closer, heart pounding, careful with each step as if I were sneaking through enemy lines. Through the crack, I spotted Victor Laskin leaning close to Travis, his voice low but sharp with intent. "You'll ensure these are filed tonight," Victor said, pressing a folded document into Travis's hand. "Once the assets are transferred, the Ridgeway funds will be safely tied into our holdings. It's the only way to protect Darlene's future." The words struck like a hammer. My name, my life's savings, twisted into their possession under the guise of protection. Travis nodded silently, his face blank, but his acceptance screamed louder than any words. My fists tightened until the nails cut into my palms. Years of work, sweat, and sacrifice, the very foundation I had built for my daughter and her children, were being handed over as if I were already buried. A bitter taste rose in my throat. I pressed closer, my ear nearly touching the cool wood of the door. A waiter slipped by with a tray, accidentally nudging the door wider. Through the gap, I caught a glimpse that stole the air from my lungs. Randall Pruitt stood tall, holding a pen. He bent over the papers spread across the table, his hand moving with the calm assurance of a man accustomed to authority. The sight froze me. He wasn't simply standing in my place at the ceremony, he was stepping into my role in every way that mattered. When the tip of his pen scratched across the signature line, the truth sank in. This wasn't an accident. It was an agreement, deliberate and signed in ink, binding and final. Randall's signature where mine should have been. The hidden betrayal made flesh. A hot surge of fury welled up, threatening to crack through the composure I clung to. I staggered back, gripping the wall to steady myself. My heart pounded against my ribs, each beat screaming at me to storm in and tear the papers to shreds. But I forced the impulse down. Bursting through that door would give them what they wanted. A scene. Proof that I was unfit. "They think I'm already gone," I muttered under my breath. The words stung as much as they steeled me. As I steadied myself, the corridor stretched long and silent ahead. Then I noticed her. Elodie, my granddaughter, stood at the far end, her small frame barely outlined by the soft glow of a sconce. Her wide eyes locked on mine, her face filled with confusion and fear. Had she seen what I had? Did she hear the whispers that carried daggers meant for me? The weight of the moment shifted. I was no longer just a father betrayed. I was a grandfather watched by the one innocent soul left in this tangled web. Her gaze carried a question unspoken, but it gave me strength all the same. I straightened, drawing in a breath that steadied the trembling in my hands. For Elodie, I couldn't vanish into silence. For her, I had to endure. As the music swelled faintly through the doors behind me, I realized the wedding wasn't just an event. It was the stage for a scheme meant to erase me entirely. But now, I wasn't the only witness. The lounge smelled faintly of polished wood and champagne. My shoes felt heavy as I crossed the marble floor, each step echoing the weight of what I had just witnessed in the corridor. The contract, the signatures, it all spun in my head like a storm that refused to settle. I couldn't carry it alone. My daughter needed to know the truth, whether she wanted to hear it or not. She was standing near the velvet chairs, her gown glowing under the chandelier. Guests floated around her like moths to a flame, offering smiles and toasts, their laughter a wall I had to push through. I steadied my voice as I approached, careful not to tremble. "Darlene," I said quietly, leaning just enough for her to hear. "Listen to me. Randall signed something he had no right to. The Laskins. They're tying your name to things you don't understand. Your future, your security, is at risk." For a brief moment, her eyes flicked toward mine, I thought I caught a flash of the girl I once carried on my shoulders. But just as quickly, it was gone. She smoothed her gown with one hand and let out a laugh that was meant for those standing nearby. "Dad, not now," she whispered, but the ice in her tone was unmistakable. "You're imagining things again." The words sliced deeper than if she had shouted. She didn't believe me, or worse, she didn't care. I opened my mouth, ready to try again, when Randall appeared. He moved with the practiced ease of a man who knew he belonged. His hand rested lightly on Darlene's arm, his smile sweet enough to fool anyone who didn't know better. "Merle," he said, his voice smooth as butter. "Today is her day. Let her enjoy it. Don't spoil this moment." It wasn't just a suggestion. It was a line drawn in the sand. He angled his shoulders to block me, as if to say the space I once filled was no longer mine. My own flesh and blood was hidden behind another man's frame. I glanced past him, desperate for a flicker of recognition from Darlene, but she only looked away, adjusting her veil, her silence more brutal than any insult. The crowd around us shifted, sensing the tension. Helena's sharp laugh broke the air, her pearls trembling with each shake of her head. Victor's approving nod followed. Like a gavel striking, Travis stood stiff, his hands buried in his pockets, eyes fixed anywhere but on me. His silence screamed complicity. Then, in a voice just loud enough for the closest guests to hear, Darlene said, "Dad, you're creating scenes. Please, stop embarrassing us." The words hung there, heavy, irreversible. A ripple of discomfort passed through the room, people murmuring, eyes darting between us. The sting of humiliation seared across my skin. I wanted to shout, to call out every betrayal, every stolen sacrifice. But something inside me froze. My silence became the only weapon left, a silence that carried the weight of decades. I stood tall, though my knees shook. My gaze swept over the room, past the glitter and false smiles, until it landed on Elodie. She stood at the edge of the lounge, her young face caught between fear and sorrow, her eyes locked with mine, and in them I saw both a question and a plea. The noise of clinking glasses and cheerful chatter pressed against me, but I held her gaze. If her mother had erased me, if the Laskins had buried me, then Elodie was my last tether to truth. The ceremony shifted toward dinner, waiters opening doors, guiding guests forward. I stayed rooted, swallowing the pain, letting it harden into something sharper. My silence was not surrender. It was a warning none of them cared to hear. And yet, even in that isolation, I felt the spark of something stirring. They might dismiss me in public, but I had seen enough behind closed doors to know this story was far from over. The applause rippled through the hall, polite and polished. As Randall raised his glass, he spoke with a steady warmth, his words woven like silk. "Family is the anchor of our lives. Today, we honor the unity of two families, bound not only by love, but by the strength of trust." Every phrase cut deeper than any blade could. It was my voice that should have been filling this room, not his. My stories of Darlene's scraped knees, her school plays, the nights I worked 2 shifts to pay off the mortgage, those were mine to tell. Yet there he stood, smiling with ease, while I lingered in the shadows at the back, unwanted and unseen. The applause swelled again, sealing his role, and something inside me snapped. My chest burned hot with decades of words I had swallowed. I stepped forward, steadying myself against the nearest chair, my voice carrying across the room. "You speak of unity, Randall, but you have no right to speak for my family." The hall froze. Glasses hovered midair, heads turned. The air thickened until you could cut it with a knife. Darlene's face paled, then hardened into ice. "Dad," she hissed, low but sharp. "Stop this. You'll ruin everything." But the tide had already shifted. I couldn't stop now. My voice quivered with age, but not with doubt. Ruin everything? I carried this family when there was nothing but debt and desperation. I gave you everything I had, Darlene, and now I'm erased so another man can play father at your wedding? Randall tried to intervene. His smile strained. "Merle, please. Today is not about the past. It's about celebrating the future. I turned on him, the weight of years pressing behind my words. You don't get to rewrite my place in this family. Murmurs spread among the guests. Helena lifted a glass to her lips, feigning detachment. Victor leaned closer to her, their whispers blending into the tension. Travis stared at the floor, his silence louder than any words. I looked at them all, my voice rising. Sacrifices don't vanish because you find it convenient to forget. You may erase my name from lists, but you cannot erase me from blood. The room pulsed with unease. Some shifted uncomfortably, others leaned in, caught in the rawness of the moment. Darlene's lips trembled before she snapped back. You're not needed anymore, Dad. Not here. Not today. Not ever. Her words sliced through the applause, through the whispers, through every memory of her small hand clutching mine when storms rattled the windows of our old house. A hush fell. The rejection was complete, public, final. And yet, as the silence stretched, something within me hardened into steel. My hands trembled, but not with weakness. This was the weight of resolve. I lifted my head, scanning the room, my gaze locking briefly with Elodie's. Her wide eyes, her small fists clenched against the tablecloth, told me she felt it too, the injustice, the fracture. I drew in a long breath, steadying the ache in my chest. You can silence me tonight, but this fight doesn't end here. The hall remained frozen, eyes fixed on me as if waiting for a collapse, but I stood firm, rooted in the truth of my own life. The murmurs from the reception still clung to me as I moved quietly through the hall. Faces had turned, whispers had circled, and I could still feel the weight of their judgment pressing against my back. Yet my feet carried me away from the crowded tables, following the trail of sidelong glances from staff who seemed too nervous to meet my eyes. One look from a waiter had been enough, a flick of his head toward a side corridor. I followed, my pulse steady but hot beneath my skin. The corridor narrowed, dim and hushed, leading to a small office tucked away from the music and clinking glasses. The door stood ajar, light spilling in a pale square onto the carpet. I pushed it open and stepped inside. A desk sat in the center, polished but cluttered with papers from the evening's planning. My gaze settled on a folder, slightly open, the edge of a document poking out like a guilty secret waiting to be found. My hands shook as I lifted it, the skin on my knuckles taut with age and tension. There it was, my name, inked in bold strokes on a contract I had never seen before. The signature looked like mine, but my gut twisted. I hadn't signed it. The slant was forced, the pressure uneven. They had written me into their lie. A cold wave washed over me. Every sacrifice, every dollar put aside for family, was being stolen with a single stroke of forged ink. I lowered into the office chair, forcing my breath to steady as I leafed through the stack. Property deeds, bank transfers, legal jargon binding Ridgeway assets directly into the hands of Victor and Helena. Randall's name appeared, scrawled with confidence. Each page confirmed the betrayal, layer upon layer of theft dressed as legitimacy. My hands trembled so hard I had to grip the desk. The urge to tear the papers apart pulsed through me, but instinct held me back. Proof. I needed proof, slipping one page free. I folded it carefully and slid it into the inside pocket of my coat. The weight of that thin sheet of paper felt heavier than stone, a weapon, small but undeniable. My eyes caught a note scribbled in Randall's hand at the margin. To finalize after ceremony. His collusion was laid bare in black and white. They hadn't even waited until the vows were finished before carving me out of everything. Anger surged, hot and sharp, but beneath it grew a colder current. Clarity. Now I knew exactly what they were doing. The creak of a hinge broke the silence. I turned sharply, clutching the folder like contraband. Jerome Vale stepped into the office. His hair was grayer than I remembered, his frame thinner, but his eyes held the same sharpness from years ago. For a moment we just stared, both men out of place in this gilded charade. He glanced at the papers in my hands, then back at my face. You weren't meant to see that, were you? I exhaled, the sound rough. No, but I did. Jerome shut the door softly behind him. He didn't accuse or demand an explanation. Instead, he leaned against the wall, arms crossed, studying me with a mix of concern and grim recognition. "They're moving against you," he said at last. "And not just socially, legally, financially. You know what this means." I nodded, the paper in my coat rustling like a heartbeat. "It means they think I'm already gone." For a moment his gaze softened. "Merle, you still have a voice. If it comes to it, I'll stand by you. I'll tell them what I saw here tonight." Relief flickered through me, not much, but enough to keep my resolve from buckling. One ally in a room full of wolves was more than I had expected. The muffled sound of footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Jerome straightened. I slid the folder shut, setting it neatly back on the desk, leaving no trace of intrusion. My palm lingered for a second, pressing against the smooth wood, before I stepped back. The door handle rattled, but no one entered. The steps faded again, swallowed by the music swelling from the reception. I reached for my coat, pressing the hidden page against my chest. My lips shaped the words barely louder than a whisper. "This is my weapon." It was fragile. It was thin, but it was mine. And as I walked out of that office, shoulders squared against the noise of the celebration, I knew the war for my place in this family had only just begun. The music drifted faintly from the ballroom as I stepped back into the crowd, the folded page in my pocket pressing against my chest like a second heartbeat. I tried to hold myself upright, to walk with the dignity they kept trying to strip from me. For a while, the chatter around me sounded like nothing more than celebration. Then I noticed how the eyes shifted toward me, a murmur, like a ripple across water, followed wherever I moved. It wasn't long before the whispers took shape. Someone near the gift table pointed. Another voice muttered something about me snooping where I shouldn't, and then it spread. The accusation that I had tried to take money from the envelopes meant for the bride and groom. The realization struck hard. This wasn't gossip by chance, it was planted. Heat rose behind my eyes, but I forced my breath to stay steady. Every accusation was a stone added to the wall they were building to box me out. For a moment I wanted to shout, to demand they stop, but I knew too well how they wanted me to break in public. Clive Darden, the MC, appeared at my side. He leaned in, his tone smooth but firm. "Mr. Ridgway, there have been complaints. I'll need you to step aside with me for a moment." His hand rested just lightly enough on my elbow to feel like courtesy. But the message was clear. I was being handled. I drew in a long breath and said quietly, "You know who I am." Clive's gaze shifted, uncomfortable, but his reply was rehearsed. "It's not about that. It's about keeping tonight peaceful." Peaceful, for everyone but me, around us. The conversations faltered. Guests turned away, not wanting to be caught staring. Some offered awkward glances of pity. Most simply avoided me altogether. The sting of it burned deeper than any open insult. To be treated as though I was the problem, like a nuisance to be managed, cut worse than the words themselves. Victor and Helena Laskin stood just a few feet away, glasses in hand. Victor's mouth curled in what passed for sympathy. "Rough night, Merle?" he said softly, shaking his head. Helena touched her pearls and sighed as if this was all some sad inevitability. To the crowd, they looked gracious. To me, their approval of this narrative was a knife slid between my ribs. Darlene stood not far behind them. Her gown shimmered under the lights, her face composed into a mask of indifference. She didn't speak, didn't raise a hand, didn't so much as twitch an eyebrow in my defense. Her silence screamed louder than any words. Everywhere I looked, shoulders turned, eyes dropped, conversations shifted to safer topics. I had been exiled in plain sight. And yet, one pair of eyes remained on me. Elodie. From across the room, her small hands clutched the tablecloth, knuckles white. Her face was pale with confusion, torn between the mother she loved and the grandfather she trusted. For a brief second, our gazes met. That flicker of doubt in her eyes told me she knew something wasn't right. I straightened, the noise of the ballroom blurring into background hum. They had planted evidence, turned whispers into a weapon, and locked me out of the circle. But inside my coat pocket, the single sheet of paper burned with truth. They could strip me of dignity in public, but they couldn't erase what I held in secret. As the music swelled again and the couples returned to the dance floor, I whispered under my breath, "This fight isn't about embarrassment anymore. It's about proving I'm still here and that they can't steal my life's work without a reckoning." The clinking of glasses echoed across the grand dining hall as Randall rose, smiling as though he were the architect of a perfect evening. "To new beginnings," he declared, his voice polished, practiced, dripping with confidence. Darlene leaned into him, her gown shimmering under the chandeliers, her eyes sweeping across the room as if she owned not just the moment, but the entire hall. Guests leaned forward, attentive, savoring the image of a family united. That was when the paper in my pocket burned hotter than any flame. For hours, it had pressed against my chest like a secret heartbeat. My hand moved before hesitation could choke me. The folded page came free, crinkling loudly in my grip. "Stop," I said, my voice carrying sharper than I expected. The chatter stilled. Dozens of eyes turned my way. "You all sit here toasting unity while signatures are forged behind closed doors." The air split. Forks froze midair. Darlene's smile faltered, just slightly, before hardening into something colder. I laid the page flat on the linen-covered table nearest me, the black ink a wound that refused to close. Gasps broke from the guests. Helena's wineglass tilted dangerously. Victor's jaw clenched as though he'd swallowed a stone. "He's confused," Helena said quickly, her voice pitched just loud enough. "At his age, it's easy to mistake things." I jabbed a finger at the signature, my name written in Randall's hand, crooked but confident. "Do these look like mistakes?" My voice shook, but not from weakness. Fury pushed it forward. The murmurs spread like fire. Some leaned closer, squinting at the page, while others leaned away, as though truth itself might stain their clothes. Darlene stood abruptly, her gown brushing against the table, the pearls at her neck trembling with each sharp breath. "Dad! Enough!" But before her words could settle, another voice rose. Jerome Vale stepped from the shadows of the crowd, his weathered face steady. "I saw it," he said simply, his hand raised as if swearing an oath. "Randall handled those papers. He signed what wasn't his to sign." The room seemed to tilt. Where moments before I had been the old fool interrupting a wedding, suddenly I was no longer alone. Jerome's presence pressed against the lies like a weight too heavy to ignore. Victor narrowed his eyes, cold calculation flickering in them. "Jerome, you're mistaken," he said. "This is a celebration, not a courtroom." Jerome didn't flinch. Mistakes don't carry another man's handwriting. The hall was no longer unified. Guests whispered openly, dividing into corners, those who clung to appearances and those who couldn't unsee the ink on the page. My chest heaved with a strange mixture of vindication and sorrow. For years, sacrifice had been my language. Tonight, truth had found its voice. Darlene's fury burst forth, breaking the fragile silence. "You're pathetic, Dad," she spat, her words ablade. Bitter, jealous, desperate for attention. "Can't you let me be happy for one night?" Her voice cracked into the high ceilings, ricocheting off marble and glass. For a moment, I felt the cut sink deep. Then a smaller, trembling voice broke through, Elodie's. "He's telling the truth," she cried, her little hands gripping the edge of the table, her eyes wet but fierce. The sound of her defense pierced deeper than all the accusations, drawing every eye to her. Guests looked between us, torn. Some shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to take sides. Others nodded quietly, shame in their eyes for having doubted me. And through it all, Darlene stood shaking, her face red with rage she couldn't disguise. She pointed a shaking finger at me, her lips curling into a vow spat through clenched teeth. "You want to fight, Dad? Fine. I'll finish this once and for all." Her words sliced the air clean. The hall seemed to hold its breath. The music long forgotten, glasses untouched. I stood taller, the page still in my hand, the ink dark and undeniable, because in that moment it was no longer about humiliation, it was war declared inside my own blood. After Jerome's bold intervention, the air inside the hall grew heavier, as though every chandelier and every polished glass on the tables trembled with judgment. Darlene seized the moment like a performer who had rehearsed her lines. Her voice cut through the murmurs, sharp and unyielding. "My father has always been like this," she announced, her gown shimmering as she turned to face the guests. "Craving attention, refusing to let go. He wants to ruin this night because he can't stand that it isn't about him anymore." Each word sliced deeper than the last. The heat of humiliation burned across the room. Randall stood nearby, silent, but his silence said enough. Victor added his own dagger, sneering with a mock sympathy that dripped poison. "He's confused," Victor said, chuckling under his breath. "Old men cling to relevance. It's sad, really." The blow landed hard. My name, my integrity, the very fabric of who I was, reduced to a public spectacle, faces blurred into one another, some with pity, others with unease. They weren't looking at a father, they were watching an exhibit, a man framed as broken, outdated, no longer belonging. Still, the paper in my pocket weighed against my chest like a stone of truth. Their words rattled the room, but they couldn't erase the ink that proved betrayal. I tightened my jaw, knowing I couldn't erupt. Not here, not now. Darlene's voice grew louder, rehearsing failures I had long buried. "Do you know?" she told them. "He almost lost the house once because he was careless. That's the kind of father he was, always on the brink of disaster. And now he wants to drag us with him." The lie struck like a hammer. The truth was simple. I had nearly lost the house because every extra dollar had gone into her college tuition, into keeping the lights on, into making sure she never felt the hunger I had once known. Yet in this hall, she painted me as reckless, unfit. The guests shifted uneasily. Some whispered doubts. Others stayed frozen, unwilling to pick sides. The murmur was worse than silence. It suggested possibility. Maybe she was right. Maybe the man they saw before them really was losing grip. But then came a voice, clear and trembling. "Elodie, why are you lying? Mom?" The hall stilled. Every chair seemed to creak as heads turned toward the young girl. Her small figure stood against the tide of wealth and gowns, her voice carrying the sting of innocence. Her eyes glistened, not from confusion, but from courage. "She's lying," Elodie cried again, louder this time. "Grandpa didn't do those things. He helped us. He helped you." The divide opened wide, child against mother. Some guests gasped. Others muttered prayers under their breath, unwilling to watch a daughter collapse under her own daughter's truth. My heart pounded with a strange mix of pride and sorrow. For all the years I had thought myself invisible, here was a spark, fragile, but alive. Darlene's face hardened into stone. Her lips curled as though she could swallow the words back into her daughter's throat. She leaned forward, her voice coated in venom. "Enough," she snapped. "You don't know what you're saying." But the room had heard. The fragile glass of her narrative cracked. I stood silent, not needing to add a word. Elodie had spoken what I had carried for years, the unshakable truth that no lie could fully bury. The fury in Darlene's eyes turned toward me, blazing with the force of a vow. "If you won't stop, I'll have you removed." Her voice echoed off the marble pillars, final and merciless. Clive Darden, bound by his role, caught the signal. He gestured discreetly to the staff, and they began to move. The weight of every eye pressed down as they advanced toward me. Each step of theirs sounded louder than the music that had stopped mid-beat. I lifted my gaze toward Randall, locking eyes with him across the distance. The challenge passed silently. "If you mean to erase me, you'll have to stand against me directly." I didn't move. I couldn't. Not because of fear, but because this was the line. This was where I had to stand. The hall had gone still. The band's instruments sat untouched, their last notes hanging in the air as though even music feared to break the silence. Elodie's small hand gripped my arm, and that grip stopped the staff in their tracks. They hesitated, glancing at each other for guidance, uncertain whether they should obey Darlene's furious command or heed the trembling courage of a child. Darlene's voice sliced through the quiet. "Get him out of here," she snapped. her gown shimmering under the chandeliers as if mocking me with every glint. She turned to the staff, then to the guests, drawing her strength from the audience like a performer in the spotlight. But then a voice rose from the corner, low at first, then firm. Travis, my son-in-law, who until this very moment had hidden behind silence, finally spoke. "There's no point in dragging this out," he said. His words rolled heavy, carrying something darker than compliance. "This was decided long before tonight. Randall, Victor, Helena, and I, we already made the agreement." A murmur spread like a ripple across a pond. Guests leaned closer to one another, their whispers sharp and hurried. Travis kept speaking, and every word dropped like a stone into my chest. "Everything is settled financially. Your father has no say in this marriage, or in what follows. He's out, entirely out." Elodie gasped, looking up at me with wide eyes. The staff froze, caught between authority and conscience. My knees threatened to buckle, but I forced them steady. Betrayal no longer came as a shock. It had simply taken on another face. The room quivered with unease. Some guests bowed their heads, others pretended to focus on their glasses, but no one spoke for me. Darlene moved to Travis's side, sliding her hand into his as though sealing their alliance in front of the world. Her chin tilted upward, proud, defiant. I let the silence stretch, not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew the silence itself accused them louder than my voice ever could. Around me, I heard fragments. Greed. Business. Shameful. Each whisper was a spark in the dry field of their reputation. My chest felt tight, but I breathed deeply, keeping calm while rage thundered within. My daughter had traded loyalty for profit, and the man she chose to marry had bartered away not just money but blood, the legacy of a name carried through decades of sacrifice. I stayed still, letting them believe my silence meant surrender. Victor stepped forward, his frame solid, his voice honed with years of boardrooms and backroom deals. "Enough." His words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. The authority in his tone silenced even the whispers. "You've embarrassed your daughter long enough, Merle," he said, his eyes cold and unblinking. "If you continue with this circus, if you utter another word tonight, you will be cut off entirely. No inheritance, no trust, no protection, and believe me, no one in Seattle will dare stand beside you after that. You'll be erased. Financially, socially, permanently." Gasps broke out across the hall. Darlene smirked, convinced that this was the finishing blow. Her expression said what her lips didn't. Checkmate. Old man. I let my gaze travel. Randall avoided my eyes, staring at his shoes like a boy caught lying. Travis tightened his jaw, unrepentant. Victor's smugness oozed from every pore, and Darlene, my daughter, the child I had once carried on my shoulders through crowded fairs, stood defiant, daring me to fight or fold. The weight of it all pressed down, but instead of crushing me, it lifted me. For the first time that night, my spine straightened fully. My voice came calm, unshaken. "You think threats will silence me? You think papers signed in the dark erase a lifetime of sacrifice? But you're wrong." The room stiffened. I slipped my hand into my pocket and felt the edge of the folded page, the proof I had taken. I didn't pull it out yet. I didn't need to. The power wasn't in showing it. It was in knowing it existed, safe in my possession. "I hold something that will outlast this night," I said evenly. "And when the time comes, it will speak louder than your lies." Helena's carefully painted smile cracked for the first time, her eyes narrowing. A tremor of unease flickered across Victor's face. Even Randall looked up, searching my expression for certainty, and finding it, the guests sat frozen, unsure whether to clap, gasp, or breathe. My words had severed the script they had all been following. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. With Elodie's hand slipping from mine, I turned toward the exit. Every step echoed on the polished floor, each one heavier than the last, but none bowed my shoulders. Behind me, whispers churned like a storm, but I carried no defeat with me, only the weight of unfinished justice. Rain slicked the streets as I stepped out of the hall, each drop masking the sting of humiliation that still clung to me. The glow from the windows behind cast my shadow long across the pavement, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. The eyes that had pierced me inside still burned in memory, cold, judgmental, triumphant. Yet beneath the ache, something stronger had taken root. I wasn't beaten. Not yet. Merle, the voice rose above the patter of rain, cautious but steady. Turning, I found Jerome Vale striding toward me, his collar up, hair damp. He looked older than the man I once knew, but in his gaze I saw something I hadn't felt all evening: recognition. "I can't stay silent anymore," he said, chest heaving. "I saw what they did in there, the papers, the way they turned everyone against you. It's wrong, and you're not alone." For a moment, the rain washed everything still. The weight I had carried for hours eased just slightly, as though someone had finally lifted a corner of the burden. Jerome's words cut through the isolation that had wrapped around me. He had chosen his side. We ducked into a corner cafe, its windows fogged from the storm. The hum of an old espresso machine filled the silence between us until Jerome leaned across the table. "Travis has debts," he whispered. "Bad ones. I heard it months ago from a man who deals in real estate with Victor. He's tied up in things he doesn't want anyone to know. That's why he's letting them control him. Why he let Randall sign where your name should have been." The bitterness in my chest deepened, but so did my clarity. They hadn't just replaced me. They had used weakness as leverage, binding my daughter's future to men who cared nothing for her beyond profit. Jerome gripped his cup, knuckles white. "You can't give up, Merle. If you walk away tonight, they'll bury you in lies. You'll vanish from her life, and from Elodie's too." I let his words settle. The hurt remained, but beneath it simmered a fire, faint but steady. I leaned back, lowering my voice. "They think I've been careless. They think they forged the only record that mattered." Slowly, I slid my hand across the table, fingers pressing against the coat pocket that held the folded page. But years ago, I knew Randall would circle like a vulture. I moved everything important, deeds, letters, accounts, into safekeeping with my lawyer. None of it is in their hands. Not yet. Jerome's eyes widened. "You planned for this?" "Not exactly this," I admitted. But I knew the way Randall looked at me, the way Victor spoke of consolidation. A man doesn't work 40 years just to hand everything over. I made sure my life's work couldn't vanish with a forged signature. The words felt like an oath renewed. I wasn't the confused old man they painted me to be. I was still the one who had held a family together when my wife died, who had paid the bills when no one else could, who had carried Darlene on his shoulders when the world seemed too heavy for her small feet. We sat in silence for a long moment, the cafe lights flickering against the wet pavement outside. Finally, Jerome nodded, his voice firm. "Then we fight smart. I'll gather what I can. Witnesses, conversations, even the staff who saw things tonight. And you prepare the rest. If they want a war over your dignity, let's give them one." I stared out at the rain-soaked streets, each drop reflecting the swirl of neon and shadow. My hand tightened on the page hidden against my chest. Dignity wasn't surrendered. It was defended, no matter the cost. The phone buzzed against the tabletop. An unknown number lit the screen. With a breath caught in my throat, I opened the message. "We know what you're holding." The words stared back like a cold hand around my neck. For all the proof I carried, the storm outside had only just begun. The courthouse doors were heavier than I expected, their weight pressed back against my hands, as though daring me to turn away. Instead, I pushed through and walked into the marble-floored lobby, clutching the sealed envelope I had guarded like my last breath. Inside, the air was cool, clinical, a far cry from the warmth of a wedding hall. Darlene and Travis entered moments later, their smiles sharp, almost rehearsed. Victor followed, his suit as crisp as his arrogance, Randall lingering behind with a forced look of paternal calm. For a moment, the image of them together burned like a knife across old wounds. They thought they had already won. I sat quietly at my table. Humiliation from the night before still clung to me, but beneath it there was a steel resolve. They believed the story was over. They were wrong. When proceedings began, the room hushed. I kept my eyes on the judge, steady, while my daughter's gaze tried to pierce me. She wanted to see doubt, weakness, but I gave her nothing. Jerome rose from the witness bench first. His voice was steady, his back straight. He spoke of the contracts passed in shadows, of Travis's debts and the whispered deals struck in corners. He told them what he saw, Randall's hand signing where mine should have been. Murmurs rippled across the courtroom. Darlene shifted uncomfortably. Travis's face hardened, and Victor merely folded his arms. Then it was my turn. I slid the envelope forward. My fingers no longer trembled. Inside were deeds, letters, and financial safeguards placed years earlier with a lawyer I trusted. Copies proved that my assets had been shielded from manipulation, no matter the schemes they had spun. The papers carried my signature, untouched, authentic, protected long before betrayal reached my doorstep. Gasps filled the room. Victor's calm cracked for the first time. Travis leaned forward as though the evidence might vanish if he stared hard enough. Darlene's lips parted, but no words came. The judge's eyes scanned the documents, then flicked to the four who had tried to erase me. Her voice carried no sympathy as she pronounced their actions fraudulent attempts at theft, their credibility broken in front of everyone they had tried to impress. The sound that followed was not applause, not jeers, but silence, heavy, damning silence. Darlene broke first, tears smudging her makeup as she whispered protests about misunderstandings. Travis sat stone-faced, unwilling to defend her now that his lies were cornered. Victor's arrogance drained away, leaving only the pale shadow of a man caught out. Randall bowed his head, unable to meet mine. For the first time in years, I felt the balance shift. Not triumph, not vengeance, but dignity, restored, steady, immovable. When it was over, I stepped outside into the early morning air. The sun had barely risen, painting the Seattle streets gold against the damp of last night's rain. My shoes echoed against the sidewalk as I walked toward home, lighter than I had felt in years. Inside my small, quiet house, I sat in the same chair where so many evenings had been spent alone. But today was different. The burden wasn't loneliness, it was peace. The door creaked, and Elodie slipped inside. She ran to me without hesitation, wrapping her arms tight around my shoulders. Her voice trembled but carried the strength I needed. "Grandpa, I believe you. I always will." Tears blurred my vision, though not from sorrow. In her embrace, I found the only inheritance that mattered, the continuation of love, untainted by greed. I held her close, whispering words more for myself than for her. Family isn't about blood alone. It's about who stands beside you when the world turns cruel. I walked out of that courthouse with nothing new in my pockets, yet everything I had fought for intact. My dignity, my legacy, and the quiet truth that no betrayal could erase who I am.